You know, I was always a huge fan of Greek mythology. Ever since I was young, I was obsessed with all the different Olympian gods and every odd creature and story that took place in those myths. You know what else I was and still am obsessed with? Video games, of course. So it's kind of surprising that I only played the iconic genre-defining God of War games as recent as 2022. Well, that isn't that recent, but the series is as old as I am, so I had my entire childhood to get into them, but I didn't. Anyway, my only exposure to God of War was when the 2018 game came out and gave new life to the franchise. You can imagine my shock when I started dating the guy who created the big thumb meme, and he told me that the then releasing God of War Ragnarok was in fact God of War 5, not God of War 2. After that, I was really interested in getting in the franchise. No hate to the newer games, but I wasn't that familiar with Norse mythology, with my knowledge of it coming from So anyway, I emulated the original trilogy, watched video essays on the spin-offs, played God of War 4, I didn't play Ragnarok yet, but I consider myself to be a fan now, so I'm gonna be doing a little marathon on all the God of War games, and I'm calling it The Road to Ragnarok. So here's how I'm gonna do things. Here's how I'm gonna do things. I'm gonna be playing all of them in order of what console they're on. Starting with the PS2, I'm gonna be doing God of War 1 and 2. Then I'm moving over to the PSP for Chains of Olympus and Ghost of Sparta. And then I'm moving over to the PS3 for Ascension and God of War 3. At the end of the journey, I'm gonna review God of War 2018 and God of War Ragnarok. And in a separate video, the free Valhalla DLC. Enough of that already. Let's talk about God of War 1. God of War is a hack and slash action adventure game released in 2005 for the PlayStation 2. It was created by David Jaffe, also known for his work on the Twisted Metal series and also known for being a bad game designer, making this tweet and calling a simple Metroid puzzle bad game design and overall being an asshole.
I don't want these characters to grow. I don't give a fuck what you're going through.
Brother, this guy stinks!
So, David Jaffe isn't really the creator of God of War. It's me! Yeah, I created God of War. David Jeffrod was only responsible for making that stupid Hades wall at the end of the game. Anyway, God of War has quite the legacy tied to it, kicking off one of the most important game series in existence and creating many God of War clones in the process. Most notably the one where Kratos turns into a werewolf. Let's not waste any more time. Here's God of War. After booting up the game and selecting the difficulty, we're introduced to our main character, Kratos, who immediately kills himself. 3 weeks earlier, Kratos is on a boat over the ocean fighting a Hydra. Here's where we're introduced to the gameplay, which has a lot of enemy combat, puzzle solving, and leveling up your abilities. I like this level up screen. It's like a blood sacrifice when you kill enemies and the red orbs come out. The combat has quite a bit of variety in terms of magic abilities granted by the gods and weapons. Kratos has a lot of things in his arsenal, but the weapons I use the most are his iconic Blades of Chaos. Pressing square or triangle lets you dish out simple attacks. Some enemies can be grabbed using the circle button, and you can prevent being hit by dodging using the right stick or shielding yourself with L1. Though there's not much of a difference if you use them or not because some enemies in the game have Titan-sized hitboxes. When you damage the bigger enemies enough, you can perform a finisher move by pressing circle and whatever button comes on the screen. Funny story, when I first played this game on an emulator, I didn't really have any other controller except my USB third-party Nintendo Switch controller, and I wasn't too familiar with the PlayStation button layout yet, so when I had to press X for one of these, my stupid Nintendo brain kept pressing the Nintendo X. Anyway, not to get too ahead of myself, but I think these were heavily improved in God of War 3 since the prompts are on the top, bottom, left, or right of the screen depending on what button you needed to press. But in the first two, they do their job fine, and they're so gory and satisfying to pull off. Oh yeah, speaking of gore, the Greek era of this franchise is pretty rated M. I mean no disrespect to these games, after all they're what made this series great in the first place, but God of War pretty much started as that edgy rated M game at the video store that parents didn't want their kids to play. Not just because of the gore, but because, well, the mini games. Okay, back to the story. The reason Kratos was fighting the Hydra was because he was doing a favor for Poseidon, the god of the sea. Kratos has been working for the gods for 10 years in exchange for them forgiving his dark past. You see, Kratos has committed an unspeakably evil sin in his past and it's been haunting him for years. What did he do? Well, it's common knowledge to everyone who plays God of War, but we'll get to that. Now let me ask some real questions. What were the other things Kratos did for the gods?
Kratos, you have done a fine job organizing the Cooter Cave of the Gods. Now, explain the FNAF lore.
And the kid, the ghost, the soul of the kid, it took over Freddy Fivebear, and now but.
Also, it should be said that Kratos might be our protagonist, but he's far from being a hero. Immediately after slaying the Hydra, he just lets the boat captain die because he's not important. Anyway, Athena tasks Kratos with the last thing to do before being forgiven. He must kill Ares, the god of war. In order to do this, Kratos has to find the Oracle of Athens in order to know how to kill Ares to begin with. After a couple of enemy gauntlets, we come face to face with the Oracle. Before we talk to her, we gotta save her from falling to her death, and Jesus, she is annoying!
What are you doing? I'm up here! Help me, Kratos, please! Kratos, find a way up! You have to get to me! Kratos, get me down! What is keeping you? Athens crumbles as you waste time! Kratos, hurry! What is keeping you? Athens crumbles as you waste time! Kratos, hurry! You have to help me, Kratos, please! Help me, Kratos, please!
Okay, after we save her and briefly learn that Kratos was once a ruthless Spartan general, the Oracle tells Kratos that he needs to journey to the Desert of the Lost Souls to find Kronos, the fallen king of the Titans. Chained onto his back is the Temple of Pandora, and in its center, Pandora's box, the box that contains the power to kill a god. Anyway, we're off to find Pandora's box. Okay, so when people talk about the worst part of the game, the underworld is almost always brought up, but how come no one ever mentions the Desert of the Lost Souls? I'm supposed to find 3 sirens in this stupid sandstorm while their singing blends into the loud wind. This section makes me feel so bored and blind. Desert of Lost Souls? More like Desert of Lost me! What were you thinking, Jaffe? Okay, we're finally at the temple. Before we get to the box, we have a lot of puzzles and gauntlets to clear. Honestly, the temple isn't that bad. In my first playthrough, it was a slog to get through, but now I thought the temple was actually pretty well put together. Each puzzle is intertwined and connected in a way. It's to the point where the entire temple is just one big puzzle. They're all well designed, but there's one part I had to sacrifice 4 centaurs into a circle, but the game didn't tell me there'd be 2 circles, which is pretty bad game design in my opinion. Besides that, the only other complaint is that sometimes pushing objects can be a little too slow sometimes. Each test has you unlock more abilities and more keys to unlock more of the temple, all the while this music plays in the background, and I love it. And speaking of music, I want to take a moment to praise this game's aesthetic. This game really does make you feel like you're going on a grand adventure through the world of Greek mythology. The backgrounds, the sound effects, the music, and the low-res textures from the PS2 just add to the magic, making this game my favorite of the series, aesthetically speaking. I like when a piece of media takes me back to whatever era it came out in, and God of War takes me back to 2005. And I mean that both in a good way and an absolutely hilarious way, because the cutscenes, both in-game and pre-rendered, really show their age. Not because of the voice acting, all the VAs do a stellar job, especially Terrence C. Carson as young Kratos.
By the gods, what have I become?
But I'm talking about the dated CGI cutscenes where they're all motion capture, and the in-game ones where they move like cartoon characters. Anyway, the story is pretty simple, but it's still solid. My only nitpick would be that it comes to a screeching halt when Kratos enters Pandora's temple, only showing flashbacks of his past like once before getting the box. After a pretty decent boss fight, a flashback showing where he got the Blades of Chaos, and more puzzles, Kratos finally gets the box. Ares senses this and hurtles a log all the way from Athens to Pandora's temple, killing Kratos. And here's where we learn the terrible sin Kratos committed 10 years ago. In a blind rage, he killed his wife and daughter. As punishment, the ashes of their remains were permanently bonded to his skin, branding him as the ghost of Sparta. It turns out Ares orchestrated this to get rid of Kratos' humanity, turning him even more loyal. I think that's a little dumb. If it was all Kratos' fault, then it would have made more sense and it would have been more impactful, but this was Ares' plan apparently, and it just backfires on him, making him look like an idiot.
You stupid.
As Harpies take the box away, Kratos dies and goes to the underworld, but he's determined to make it out, so we have another level before us. Hey look, it's the boat captain. I'm glad he's not around for this section of the game because it straight up fucking sucks. Most of the game was focused on combat and puzzles with very little emphasis on platforming, but the underworld is all about platforming. Bad platforming. It sucks. These rotating bladed meat sticks you have to balance on I can handle, but the wall, dear god, the wall. This rotating cylinder covered in blades is a mile long and you have to climb it to advance. If you get hit, you have to do the whole thing all over again. I fucking hate this wall! It was okay. After we make it out of the underworld, we meet Ares, recover the box, and uncover the ultimate power to kill a god. The Mega Mushroom from New Super Mario Bros. The first phase for the final boss was alright, but the second phase is pretty interesting where you have to fend off a whole army of Kratoses to protect his family. I like it. It's a great way of mixing gameplay and storytelling. The last phase has Ares rip out all of Kratos' magic and weapons away to kill him, but Kratos takes a giant sword to fight Ares. Instead of a traditional health bar, it's balanced like a scale that you have to tip in your favor, so to speak. After you kill Ares, Athena forgives Kratos of his past actions, but she said she never promised to get rid of the memories that haunt him. So, like the beginning of the game, Kratos attempts to kill himself, but Athena saves him, telling him there's an empty throne on Olympus. Also, Olympus looks so pretty. After walking up the stairs to the Golden Palace, Kratos sits down upon his throne as the new God of War. So that was the first God of War game. I really can't recommend this enough. I definitely had a fun time revisiting this. Sure, it's not perfect and the cutscenes aged like milk and some aspects of the gameplay definitely feel very first season-y, but it's still a really solid standalone Greek tragedy about a man fueled by vengeance eventually becoming the one thing he sought to destroy. Not only that, but it laid down the foundation of what would become one of the greatest video game series of all time. I'm so glad I'm the lead director instead of that asshole.
I don't want
Ares!
to
Destroy my enemies!